Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. Alan Mill, your host, and a return guest, a welcome return guest. He's been with us, I don't know, a dozen times over the years. Representative Joe Atkins of District 52B, who is seeking his 7th consecutive term in the legislature. And one of the interesting statistics that I saw about you was, as I was researching this, and I do research before each of these shows, you have passed or had more legislation passed than any other member of the House.
Right. Yeah, it's actually more bipartisan legislation. And I just learned that not too long ago. House partisan or nonpartisan staff had compiled the data, and apparently I passed more bipartisan legislation than any other state representative.
And it's an interesting thing because you are able, one of the few people who are able to talk with the other side of the aisle, and you have forged some friendships there, but you have forged some alliances which led to the passage of this legislation, which really inures to the benefit of the people. And, you know, what's better than that?
You know, literally sometimes it's just a matter of getting up out of your chair, physically walking across to the other side of the aisle and just talking with people.
But there are people
folks who won't
do that.
I know,
right,
I know.
Right.
And you know, everybody can have their own philosophy. But I've always found that it just makes some sense to just chat. Most of the folks, you know, there's an alarming perception that we are constantly battling and that we are always at each other's throats. And the fact is, about 97% of the time, we're in agreement. Sometimes it's a matter of how we're going to get to the end goal. But the vast majority of my colleagues, they've got good hearts. They're there for a good reason. We just want to get things done.
And that's more than I can say about the U.S. Congress, because I don't think that those people necessarily want to get things done. I think it's in many instances where they've just been trying to block anything that the president is interested in or has suggested.
Some of them have come right out and said that.
Yeah,
that they're
some
there
of them
to
have,
stop
yes.
a bunch of, you know, and the gridlock is working to their
benefit. It's nice to think that maybe there is an intelligence level here in Minnesota that's a little above that.
Well, it's, you know, like Garrison Keillor said, I mean, we're a little bit above average here anyway.
And good looking, all of us.
No,
well, maybe it's our children, but that's what Bernie Sanders said yesterday to Barbara Walters when she was doing the 10 most notable people of 2015. She wanted to know if it was his good looks that had gotten him this far.
I just want to buy the poor guy a comb.
And, you know, I don't care what he does with his hair. It's his philosophy that's important. And
well, he was definitely one of the most fascinating folks in 2015.
And one of the most surprising also.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of things that we want to talk about. Number one, you introduced a bill, I think with a Republican recently, that wants to return lost money to the citizens. The state is sitting on millions, and maybe hundreds of millions of dollars, and they haven't shown any great urge to get it back into the hands of the families that it belongs to. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this is, I'll tell you, it is in the hundreds of millions. It's $711 million that the state of Minnesota is holding on to that belongs to Minnesotans all across the state. And it's in the form of unclaimed funds. So if your bank or your credit union, annuity, insurance company, a past employer, if they've got money that they've tried to get to you but have been unable for some reason, or insurance proceeds, whatever it may be. In one case, the largest one that I came across, there was a fellow locally in Mendota Heights. They had his last name misspelled. They had one extra B in it, and they were one digit off on his home address. And they were trying to send him an annuity check. It was one that his dad had set up for him. Kept trying to send it, it kept coming back, and then they stopped trying to find him. $142,000 accumulated in that account, which they eventually turned over to the Department of Commerce, the state of Minnesota. And we make, as the state, we make no affirmative efforts to reach out and find anybody. We do some outreach in terms of go to the state fair and go to the Mall of America, go on TV every once in a while and tell people to go to the website. But we don't actually send any letters. So I sent this fella a letter. And I said, you know what? You might have $142,000.
Surprise!
It was a good day for him. And we have.
I hope he was in your district, because
indeed he was. Indeed he was.
I would
and
say that would be
very thankful
a vote that you could count on.
But you know what, though? I mean, it's folks with the thing that really makes a difference. You know, sometimes it might be $300 or $400 or $600. We had a local veteran, a guy who's been deployed 3 times now to Iraq and Afghanistan. For his family, it was $650, and he bought a dishwasher. Their dishwasher had broken. He's got 3 kids, they're active family. In fact, Alan, one of the most disproportionate groups is veterans and active military. You know, they only make up about 1 to 2% of the population, but they appear to have about 20% of the unclaimed funds, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, because they're deployed,
change of address,
they're
like
gone
that.
for long periods of time. Yeah. And so we've been Shane Clifton, who was a firefighter in St. Paul. I still get a little choked up when I talk about it. He passed away a couple months ago while on duty. Was a decorated vet, and we didn't find him prior to his death. But he had a friend who knew Shane's dad, and his funds, which a significant amount of money is now going to his daughters, his 2 little daughters. So it
certainly is an appropriate use of the money, rather than having it sit and fallow in the state coffers.
And that drives you crazy. And the fact that we don't reach out and find people, and they're easy to find. I mean, we got the list just for our constituents in Eagan, Inver Grove Heights, Mendota Heights area.
I haven't gotten a call.
Well, you're pretty good apparently at keeping track of your money.
I don't have any to keep track of.
But you know what? Most of the folks, these aren't irresponsible people. And they're folks that didn't know they had insurance proceeds that were supposed to be coming their way, or they had a bank account that had been set up for them by a parent. There's all sorts of, or they moved and the previous employer sent a paycheck to the old address. So it's a lot of money. It wasn't a lot of work to find folks. That was what sort of drove me crazy. I mean, we spent just a couple minutes per person to find them, and then we were able to locate people. We sent out 1,000 letters, about $1,700 on average per person. So it can be done, although the Department of Commerce now recently told me that they're a little overwhelmed with all of the claims, just from our efforts. I was going to say it's a good problem to have, right?
You know, as public servants, they should have been really on top of this.
Yeah. Well, and in fairness to the department folks, I mean, they've only got a handful of employees that work on this, and they don't have the sorts of resources to reach out and find, to actually do the finding of people. That's the legislature's fault. We used to have a budget. Do you remember the old full-page ads that were in the Pioneer Press?
Absolutely.
We stopped doing that. That used to generate all sorts of claims, all sorts of ability for people to, they'd see their name, or they'd see a neighbor's name or the friend's name, relative's name, and they'd call the department and they'd pursue their money. Now you have to affirmatively go to the website. It's www.missingmoney.com, And then you have to carefully put in your name, because if you put in Joe rather than Joseph Atkins, or Al rather than Alan Miller, it's not going to show up. And so you could have a lot of claims, and then you have to pursue it from there. But we don't do those full-page ads. We don't send out a letter, and that's really unfortunate.
That certainly is. But that's one of the reasons for legislation like that you have been elected 6 times, overwhelmingly, certainly the last few times, and why you are certainly favored in this upcoming election for the same reason, because you produce for the people in your district and you're trying to do good. And the fact of the matter, you were just attacked in the papers within the last week over really what comes down to a foundation that you set up years ago. So let's talk about that, because of all the non-issues that I've seen lately, that seems to be one of the leading ones.
Well, I actually think it's a great issue. I helped set up a foundation, and eventually they actually hired me as their executive director back in 1996, so long before I was in the legislature. For the Inver Grove Heights Best Foundation, we raised money for scholarships for kids graduating at Simley High School.
And you were one of the architects of it.
Yeah, I was one of those when I used to have dark hair. It was a long time ago when we got it going. But we had 3 scholarships at the time, totaling $2,000. And so we thought we could do better. And we worked really lots of good volunteers, lots of folks helping out. And last year, I think we gave out 120 scholarships, totaling $168,000. And
a far cry from...
And it's, you know what, and it's not just about helping kids afford to go to college. It's encouraging them while they're in high school. It's giving them a pat on the back, telling them how we appreciate that academic performance, that involvement. And it's, so if you're going to give me a hard time about something, that would be what I would welcome if there's, if that's my fault, helping to raise money for scholarships for kids. I guess I could just raise it for campaign contributions or something like that, but I think there's better uses than campaigns.
I think that's going to go away and not have any traction.
Well,
to
I
it.
hope not, because I'd sure like to keep talking about it some more. In fact, if anybody wants to donate, wherever the camera is, and there's, by the way, Egan has a terrific foundation. The Apple Valley, Egan, Rosemont School District, terrific foundation. South St. Paul is a terrific foundation. It's really a neat thing to be able to help kids go on to school.
As a lot of service organizations do also, the Lions or the Rotary and organizations like that, especially in today's society where education has become so expensive, even community college, unfairly so, when you look at other countries around the world, but
well,
that as it may.
We've been trying to do our darndest when, I don't want to make this a super partisan thing, but the Democrats 2 years ago, we made it an issue because the idea, college affordability is getting away from a lot of families. We actually made it a priority to freeze college tuition for 2 years. And to their credit, the Republican majority in the House tried to do that. They didn't quite get there this time in spite of a $1.9 billion surplus. But we've got to get after this issue. I mean, I've got 3 kids, well, one just graduated, amen, but 2 kids still in college at the University of Minnesota at the Carlson School. And I'll tell you, I don't know how families do it. I mean, we've been saving and saving, Julie and I have, and the kids have been working. But it's, the average student now graduates almost $30,000. This is just for an undergraduate degree. I don't know about you, and I was able to work my way through college and law school.
I did too, as a matter of fact.
With no debt by the time I got done. But that was working full time and we had an opportunity. My kids working, even if they were working full time, would not be able to do that anymore.
Well, when I was in law school, my family suffered some reverses, and what looked like was going to be some support, and I was newly married at the time, just evaporated. Yeah. So what do? You're in law school. You had a successful first year. Number one, I went to, this is Syracuse Law, I went to the school, and they were very generous to me in giving me some scholarship money. And number two, I got a full-time job. Yep. And, that's what we had to do. But they can't do that today because the debt is so tremendous that It's a whole. My daughter dug her way out of it in her 40s. I mean,
and you know what? That it's not just the number. It's not just the size of the debt. It's that they're putting off having families. They are putting off being able to buy a home. You know, all of the life decisions that come along with that are hanging over these young people. So it's what I'm getting at is I think we need to continue attacking the issue of tuition.
Absolutely.
And otherwise, we're just going to saddle these poor young people.
As I said with Professor Schultz earlier, during his interview, education, health, environment, these are the things that we really owe it to the next generations to tackle and to conquer.
Yeah.
Or we're going to continue slipping statistically
right
among
now,
nations.
In Minnesota, though, I would add transportation to that as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is just
Infrastructure.
staring us. Crumbling schools. I mean, we're blessed right here, right where we are today. We've had our voters invest in schools in a pretty healthy way. But if you look across Minnesota, it's a crisis with crumbling schools, crumbling roads. Half of our bridges, 50% of our roads are now more than 50 years old. 40% of our bridges are more than 40 years old.
Well, Senator Carlson came in here a few years ago with a piece that fell off the Lafayette Bridge when he was inspecting it. Now that's a bridge that's under, if it's not completed now, it's under repair because it was in desperate shape, and we know that a bridge can fall into the river, etc., as we had on I-35. But yeah, we have to do these things. We owe it to the next generation to do these things. We have possibly as much as $2 billion in a surplus. What are we going to do with it? Jesse would say, give it back to the people.
There'd be a bunch of Jesse checks in your mailbox again.
So everybody would get a few $100s, which is really meaningless in the big picture, but we're talking about upwards of $2 billion. And I know the Republicans wanted to give a great deal of it back, but I think that there are more appropriate uses for it.
Well,
so where's that going to go?
You know, and the Republicans have put forth they have targeted. Their initial plan was primarily out-of-state businesses. It was a business reduction, business tax reduction, and why they targeted businesses that were outside of Minnesota. I don't know if they just didn't appreciate to whom the business tax cuts were going, but I hope that piece of it gets revised. I do think there will be some tax cuts. I hope that they are for property tax. Property tax is the most regressive, and it is driving some folks right out of their homes. So I'm hoping that there will be some property tax reduction. I actually think that the Social Security tax, in fact, I'm the chief author of a bill that passed last year to eliminate the Social Security tax. We are one of only 13 states that still have it. I think that it won't necessarily be fully eliminated, because if you're making $400,000 or something like that, it's probably not going to be eliminated for you.
And you probably don't need
right.
Social Security.
Right. But so you've got those two pieces on the tax cut side that I think will happen in some fashion, or will get some traction. And then critical needs is, there's infrastructure needs like we just discussed. The transportation side is probably the single most glaring issue that we have in front of us right now. By some estimates, it's a $6 billion gap just to get us up to having adequate roads over the next 10 years. We're the second leading, Twin Cities now, second leading region in the country for congestion. Now, mind you, we're number one on a lot of lists. We've got the best quality of life, best hospitals, best run state we just heard from. Best state for business, I might add. Forbes said we're the number one state for business. Got a lot of good things for us. But you can't just sit on and watch our roads crumble and our bridges crumble. And
they are in really terrible shape.
Do you remember
that David Letterman joke about there's a pothole outside the studio that's so big that there's a pharmacy down at the bottom of it. And
well, I always use the analogy of, I think it was an oil change ad. You can pay me now or you can pay me later. And later is a lot more expensive.
Always.
And so if we do a little bit, just continue to invest, and with this surplus that we have, I think now is the time to start that reinvestment in our. That's not to minimize health and jobs and education and so forth, but we really got to get after our transportation infrastructure.
Now the governor has been very big on education, pre-K, pre-kindergarten, early education, and we've seen what kind of dividends that pays in the long run. So I guess that's going to come up again. But what else is going to come up in this session that's going to start, I guess, only a couple of months from now?
All kinds of stuff are going to, it's supposed to be like an 8, 9, 10-week session. There is no running water in the Capitol, so hopefully that'll shorten up some of the speeches a little bit. But we don't have, it's a small window in order to get a lot done. Chief among those are going to be the tax bill with some of the, probably some tax cuts that I described earlier. Transportation is going to be top of the list. And then we've got, it's the so-called bonding year. When we talk about the capital projects, fixing the roofs and so forth at the community colleges and schools and bridges and roads. If we go in and get those 3 things done, that's what we should set out to do. But we also have things like the ID. If you get your license out and try to fly now, you can still do it. A few months from now, we don't know if that's, we're one of 4 states in the country that have not put in the enhanced security into our driver's license. So you might not be able to get on that plane to Mexico or wherever you're going if we don't get that taken care of relatively soon as well.
Fortunately, I have a passport.
There you well, yeah, but not everybody does, Alan.
Yeah,
you know, the average Minnesotan, how many people in Minnesota, my guess is it's 5 or 10% that have a passport. If you want to go see the family and get on an airplane, and it's not just people that want to get on an airplane, it's security folks. I just heard from a constituent in Inver Grove Heights who said he has to show 2 forms of ID. He's a federal contractor. He can now show 1 because he's got his passport, but he can no longer use his Minnesota driver's license
because
for
we
purposes
haven't done the enhancement.
Because we haven't done the enhanced driver's license. So it's there's issues like that also got to get tackled. And then the unclaimed or the lost and unclaimed funds that are being held by the state is another thing. When that's now approaching $1 billion, it's time to start taking efforts and getting those dollars back to the people who own those dollars.
So what was that website once again if people want to go in and check?
It sounds bad, but it's www.missingmoney.com. And some folks, they say it sounds like the name of a scam, you know, when it's missingmoney.com. That is actually, if you go to the Department of Commerce website, you'll see the connection, the link to the missingmoney.com. Just make sure you put your name in all of the ways that you might otherwise spell it. So,
where are we with health care?
Well, there's good news in the world of health care. We just got the rankings 2nd year in a row now. I think we are #1. Our hospitals are #1 in the country as far as delivering health care. So we've got good news. But we also are driving, we're seeing costs, premiums are going up. So average premium increase of 14% in the individual market. And we've got to step up and do more to, now part of that, and I know I'm jumping around, part of that is, remember now that we've got a federal law that requires coverage of pre-existing conditions. That obviously, that's a wonderful thing, everybody supports it, but if you don't think it costs money, you're crazy.
Not everybody supports it, but anybody with just half a brain supports it.
Well, even a quarter of a brain. You know, you can't let the folks that have had cancer or diabetes or epilepsy just shove them to the side. Those are folks that, and if you do, what happens? They end up in the emergency room with a bill that's 1,000 times or 10,000 times what it would be if you treated it in a preventive fashion.
Right.
So we knew that we were going to see some increase in premiums. But you know what? There's still an absolute lack of transparency. If you go to the doctor, can you ask your doctor how much it's going to cost?
No.
And get it, and I have. No. I actually have. My doctor is a friend of mine. He's a great guy.
They don't have a clue.
He has no idea what everything costs. When it comes to prescription drug prices, we see all you got to drive 500 miles north and you can buy the same exact drug for 1/3 of the price.
Well, that's one of the real outrages, is what the pharmaceutical companies have done and continue to do in terms of drugs. And I understand that there's research and development, R&D, and they have to account for that. But like that young man who was arrested yesterday who raised the cost of a drug 500%, I don't think that that's necessary.
Right.
I don't think that that's legitimate. I don't think that you can do that in good conscience. And of course he was arrested because he was running a Ponzi scheme, allegedly.
Yeah, he wasn't arrested for overcharging for drugs. That just made him unpopular.
No.
He was arrested for...
What he was doing was overcharging so he could pay off
yes.
the Ponzi scheme, apparently. And I say apparently because he hasn't been proven guilty yet, except in all of our minds, but not in a court of law.
So so we can do more on that front. And in fact, this gets, give me 60 seconds on the issue of prescription drugs, because in Maine they passed a law that actually allowed people from Maine to buy there and re-import their drugs from Canada at about 1/3 the price. It got thrown out by a federal court. If you read that decision, they actually left open some possibilities for a way to do that. And I actually am proposing that legislation this year in 2016
is that right? Good for
to
you.
allow Minnesotans. Now you'd have to re-import it to a Minnesota pharmacy, which I think is critically important. The pharmacist and that relationship, so that you have, the drug interactivity issues, would be able to be assisted, the patient be assisted by the pharmacist. They'd also have to be FDA approved drugs. And it could not be from places other than Canada. That was one of the things that the decision they talked about. You could re-import from anywhere in the world. They didn't like that. They said it was too expensive. So my bill says just from Canada, got to be FDA approved, got to come to a Minnesota pharmacist. And I think that can withstand legal challenge.
Well, good luck with that.
And then, better yet, it brings down the price. Because once the drug companies know that in Minnesota you can buy from Canada, it'll undoubtedly drive down the cost of the drug here in Minnesota.
And drugs are really, really expensive.
They say that it's driving half of the increase in the price of health care. So it's big. It's a big ticket item.
And of course, nationally, we had a situation where the government, except for the VA, couldn't negotiate drug prices, which is a complete
ludicrous.
absurdity.
Just absolutely ludicrous.
And just feeds into really the pharma.
Well, this is America. I'm a capitalist, and with a capital C. I believe in capitalism. I know you are sort of on the edge every once in a while, but I think that's what's one of the things that's made America a wonderful place. But negotiation is part of that.
Now, I believe
you're supposed to be able to negotiate.
I believe that there are certain things that
I didn't say I didn't believe in people.
Obligated to do.
No, I'm not going to argue with you. It's great.
The type of legislation that you propose and get passed shows that you have a conscience and that you believe in people. Not everybody in the legislature does. Now, probably I'm to the left of you. Well, I would have to be.
I was going to say, how could you not? You're to the left of everybody,
Hillary and I'm supporting Bernie Sanders. That speaks for itself. But we can talk about it, and hopefully one of them will be the one to carry this nation forward.
This will probably drive some of your viewers a little nuts. I've been saying for about 8 months now, take Donald Trump seriously. Everybody laughs at me when I say that, but I think he captures something among a lot of voters about how they're tired of the way government works. They're tired of the gridlock.
We're going to have to leave it on that, Representative Joe Atkins. But if you think that he has some things to say, remember Bernie Sanders. What can I say? Joe, thanks so much.
My pleasure. Good to see you, Alec.